They looked perfect on camera, rich, beautiful, smiling. Then the director dropped dead on the studio floor, and Detective Edward Hale discovered the truth. The whole family had already been trying to destroy each other. A reality show wanted the perfect family. What it got was something else. A father hiding affairs, a mother controlling everyone like a product, a daughter leaking secrets, a son sabotaging the production, a grandmother watching it all in silence. Then the director died in the middle of filming, and suddenly every smile on camera became evidence.
The Perfect Family. Prologue. The Smile Test. The studio was too bright for anyone to feel human. Light poured down from white ceiling panels, struck from the sides and soft walls of artificial daylight, and bounced off the polished floor as if the building itself had decided natural shadows were bad for ratings. Everything had been built for one purpose: to make happiness look real, even when the people standing in the frame wanted nothing more than to ruin one another. At the center of the set, above the kitchen island, hung the illuminated sign, The Perfect Family. Beneath it stood a dream kitchen: white cabinets, warm wood, stone counters, a bowl of lemons placed with mathematical innocence, designer chairs no one would ever have chosen without a sponsor, a coffee machine worth more than a decent used car. The room had been engineered to trigger one simple reaction in the audience: I want this. The veils were already in position. They were smiling. That was the ugliest part, because the director of the show, Graham Lockwood, knew better than anyone in the building that the smiles were not expressions. They were products. He had spent the last 3 weeks filming the most marketable family on television and watching them turn on one another the moment the cameras went dark. Richard Vale stood nearest camera 2. Tall, silver-haired, perfect posture, the kind of man whose face had been trained for years to suggest calm authority even when there was nothing underneath it but self-protection. He once hosted lifestyle programs, then reinvented himself as the polished patriarch of a media family empire. His smile was expensive, disciplined, and completely empty. Off-camera, his face changed in subtle ways that were worse than anger. It became cooler, flatter, like a man who had spent so long selling an image of himself that he no longer considered the person beneath it worth maintaining. His wife, Evelyn, stood beside him with one hand resting lightly on the island. She was camera-perfect too, beautiful in this sharpened, controlled way that suggested maintenance, not luck. Her makeup was flawless. Her hair was pinned into effortless elegance that had taken effort from at least 2 other people. On-screen, she sounded nurturing, composed, wise. Off-screen, her voice had the frightening precision of someone who never needed to raise it because she had spent a lifetime making other people lower theirs. Their daughter, Lauren, held a ceramic mug that had been handed to her exactly 7 minutes earlier by a prop assistant named Tessa, who now stood just outside the lighting grid, trying not to look frightened. Lauren smiled worst of all. She was 22, gorgeous in the way social media loved, and already famous enough to have her own sponsorship deals independent of the family brand. But her face had a structural problem. It understood obedience better than joy. When she smiled for the camera, you could see the shape of compliance, not warmth. The audience read vulnerability. Graham read exhaustion. On the other side of the island stood Noah, 17, the youngest, the one producers described as sarcastic but lovable in pitch meetings because adults always assumed teenage contempt was entertaining until it became specific. Noah had his hands in his pockets and his shoulders slightly lowered in the posture of a boy who had learned that refusing enthusiasm was the only form of control still available to him. Earlier that morning, when a production assistant had asked him to look a little more open and emotionally present, he had answered, "Do you want that before or after the fake breakfast?" And then there was Miriam, grandmother. Not always part of the core scenes, the network worried that she drew too much attention. She had presence, and executives hated presence when they couldn't package it. So she had been placed slightly apart, in a chair near the window where she could still be part of the frame without overpowering the fantasy. She wore navy, held a cane she barely needed, said very little. Of everyone in the room, she looked the most real. That made her the most dangerous. And standing just outside the frame, in front of a bank of monitors and 2 exhausted assistant producers, was Graham Lockwood, 39, thin, Black shirt, headset on one ear, tablet in one hand, a paper cup of cold coffee in the other. He had slept badly for almost a month, and now lived in that useful, brittle stage of fatigue where irritability sharpened into accuracy. Camera 2, tighter on Richard. Lauren, not at the floor, at lens. Noah, hands out of your pockets, you're not at a funeral. Not yet, Noah muttered. A few crew members laughed nervously. Graham did not. Excellent, he said. If you want to keep that line, say it after we finish the sponsor integration worth $200,000. Noah raised an eyebrow. Are you threatening me with advertising? I'm threatening you with editing, Graham said. It's worse. Richard turned toward his son immediately, the movement so smooth it looked paternal even from the side. Noah, he said quietly, focus. Noah looked at him the way some sons looked at fathers once they had crossed the line from fear into contempt. Maybe you focus, he said. Evelyn turned her head. One movement. That was enough. Noah stopped. Graham watched all of it on the monitor wall. On screen, the family looked immaculate. Warm color balance, soft skin tones, correct emotional spacing. Richard looked steady, Evelyn looked wise, Lauren looked tender and relatable, Noah looked rebellious but safe, Miriam looked dignified, manageable, old in the premium way. If Graham had not known what happened in the hallways, the dressing rooms, the parking garage, and the off-hours production meetings, he might almost have believed in them. But he knew too much. That was the problem. 3 weeks earlier, when the network signed the Vale family for the first season of The Perfect Family, everyone celebrated. They were ideal, rich enough to fascinate viewers, polished enough to reassure advertisers, unstable enough to generate episodic tension without becoming legally uninsurable. They sold wellness products, home systems, books, courses, and relationship advice. They had sponsorships, followers, a podcast about trust, and a breakfast cereal endorsement that made Graham want to drink bleach every time he saw the packaging. Then filming began, and the rot came up through the floor. Richard was sleeping with a producer from a previous campaign and assumed no one on this show knew it. Evelyn was negotiating privately with the network for a solo contract without her husband. Lauren had been secretly recording arguments at home and sending them to someone outside the family. Noah had been sabotaging equipment in ways too small to look deliberate but too consistent to be called random. Miriam knew more than she should have about all of them and watched the house implode with the tired patience of a woman who had long ago stopped confusing survival with affection. And Graham had been collecting everything, not just for the show, for leverage, for protection, for a final cut no one else would see coming. In his editing suite, there was already a hidden folder with no label and no shared access. Inside it were raw moments that never made it into the official episode timeline. Real conversations, real threats, real faces. If assembled correctly, it would not merely improve the season, it would destroy the entire Vale family brand in a single release. He wasn't going to use it yet, but he was going to. Soon. Too soon. Everybody ready? Called the first assistant director. Graham raised a hand without taking his eyes off the screen. Cameras? Ready. Sound? Rolling. Lighting? Good. Graham looked at the Vales. 5 faces, 5 smiles. 5 people who had, in the last 3 weeks, each tried to damage another member of the family in some petty, strategic, or professionally catastrophic way. Perfect. Let's go, he said. Scene 26, family breakfast. And let's try this one without the hidden blood feud. That really limits the genre, Miriam said quietly. This time, Graham almost smiled. Rolling. The red light came on. Richard turned first. For us, mornings always begin with simple things. Coffee, light, and time for each other. Evelyn placed one hand on the counter. There's so much noise in the world. Home should be the place where you feel heard. Lauren lifted her mug. Even when you don't always know what to say, she said. Only someone who knew the off-camera version of her life would hear the poison in that line. Noah looked directly into the lens and for the first time all morning delivered a smile that would absolutely survive the edit. Especially when you don't want to, he said. Graham looked up from the monitor. Something was wrong, not with the dialogue, he was used to that, with the rhythm. He watched the wide shot, then the close-up of Richard, then back to the wide shot. Miriam turned her head slightly, not toward the camera, toward him. Graham frowned. Old women like that never looked by accident. She had noticed something. He stepped forward. Cut for a second? He never finished the sentence. The pain hit him in a place that did not feel like a body part. It felt as if someone had reached into the center of his chest and squeezed something that should never have been touchable. His breath failed in the same instant. The coffee slipped in his hand. Cold liquid hit the floor. On the monitor, Richard was still smiling. Evelyn still had perfect posture. Noah was the first to stop performing. "Hey," he said. Lauren turned. Graham tried to inhale. Nothing. His hand opened. The tablet fell and hit the floor face down. The headset slipped from one ear. One ye gave out. Someone shouted his name. The cameras kept filming. That would become problem number 4 later. He fell badly, not dramatically, not cleanly, hard. One shoulder striking the edge of the kitchen island before the rest of him hit the floor, face down. Noah stepped back first. Evelyn stood up too fast for a woman who had been playing Serenity 5 seconds ago. Richard was already moving. "Kill the cameras," someone shouted. "Don't touch anything," someone else shouted. Graham, can you hear me?" Miriam did not move. She remained in her chair, looking at the director on the floor, and then, only once, looked at the family, as if counting. The assistant director dropped to his knees beside Graham's body. "Oh God." He looked up. His face had already gone white. "He's not breathing." On the far monitor, the wide shot still held. The perfect kitchen, the perfect family, the dead director on the floor. Light calibrated for happiness. No viewer would see this live. It wasn't a broadcast day. This was a controlled studio shoot. But within hours, fragments of the footage would leak and millions of people would replay the final seconds, convinced they were seeing the truth. They would be wrong, because the truth had happened earlier and not on the floor. Somewhere in that studio, in the minutes before Graham Lockwood collapsed, every member of the Vale family had already done something small, ugly, strategic, or criminal in an attempt to implicate someone else. That was what would make the scene almost impossible. Too many lies, too many private manipulations, too many people trying to ruin each other at once. The police would seal the set within the hour. The network would attempt to freeze the footage within 2. The family's lawyers would arrive faster than the medical examiner. And late that night, Edward Hale would receive a call from an exhausted executive producer who would say the one sentence necessary to make him accept immediately. "We need someone who can understand this faster than the police, because the problem isn't who hated the director." A pause. "The problem is that it looks like the whole family was trying to frame each other at the same time." Edward would look out at the city through his office window, then ask, "The perfect family?" "Yes." Another pause. Then he would say, "You don't have a household, you have a crime scene that was marketed too long as a brand," and hang up. Because by then, he would already know the essential thing. If 5 people are trying to ruin one another at the same time, the real killer rarely wins by being the smartest person in the room. He wins because everyone else is too busy managing their own lie to notice the exact moment the game stops being vicious and becomes fatal. Chapter 1. The Set. By the time Edward Hale arrived at the studio, the family had already begun rewriting the day. That was normal. People rarely waited for lawyers before editing reality. Lawyers only helped them standardize it. The production complex stood on the edge of the city in a district full of windowless buildings, loading bays, temporary signage, and expensive lies assembled at industrial speed. From outside, the structure looks like a logistics warehouse. Inside, it contained kitchens that had never cooked real meals, bedrooms no one slept in, and smiling domestic fantasies lit with enough electricity to power a small neighborhood. The front gate was blocked by 2 police vehicles and a black SUV belonging to the network's legal team. Edward showed his pass, crossed the lot, and entered through a side corridor that smelled of cable insulation, makeup powder, stale coffee, and panic. Detective Inspector Lena Ashcroft was waiting for him beside a wall covered with laminated floor plans and call sheets. She did not look pleased to see him, which Edward always considered a good start. Police detectives were usually either incompetent or exhausted enough to mistake outside help for relief. "Hale," she said. "Ashcroft, you came quickly. You said television." That wasn't meant as bait. It worked anyway. She turned and started walking without checking whether he followed. He did. The victim is Graham Lockwood, director, 39, no obvious trauma beyond the fall. Preliminary medical opinion suggests sudden cardiac collapse, possibly toxin-related, but toxicology is pending. The set was locked down 43 minutes after the incident. Nobody left the studio family wing in that window without being logged or filmed. Nobody? Ashcroft gave him a dry look. Nobody useful. Good, Edward thought. She was already tired of imprecise innocence. They passed open dressing room doors, racks of clothing, half-packed props, and 2 production assistants sitting on the floor with the expression of people who had just discovered that backstage access did not make them adults. "Where's the family?" Edward asked. "Separated. Talking? Constantly." "Good." Ashcroft pushed open a double door and the light changed. They entered Studio B. The set still glowed. That was the first unpleasant thing. The kitchen lights were still on. The under-cabinet strips still cast their soft amber warmth across the counters. The island still looked inviting. The lemons still sat in their bowl with mindless optimism of objects that had not yet understood death. Camera rigs remained in place. One monitor still displayed a frozen frame of Richard Hale smiling into lens 2. The body was gone. The shape of it remained. Tape markers on the floor, a cracked tablet and an evidence sleeve, a paper cup tipped on its side near the edge of the island, one dark stain where cold coffee had hit the polished surface and then dried into a shape that looked irritatingly deliberate. Edward stood still and let the room arrange itself. Too many people walked onto sets like this and immediately started hunting for murder. The set itself came first. Sets were lies with budgets, and budgeted lies always revealed priority. "What's untouched?" asked Ashcroft. "Most of the scene," she said. "We froze the set after the medics cleared the body." She handed him a printed map of the stage. Camera placements, light positions, family marks taped on the floor, monitor wall near the control station, a service corridor behind the decorative pantry wall, another narrow route behind the false windows. He looked at the plan once, then up at the room. "Good," he said. Ashcroft folded her arms. "That's the second time someone said that today and made it sound threatening." Edward ignored that. He walked to the place where Graham had fallen. From here he could see the kitchen island, the family marks, the main cameras, the monitor bank, and the reflected image of the room in the glossy black panel above the coffee station. Interesting. He crouched. Was he facing the family when he went down? Yes. Moving toward them? Possibly, one step forward before collapse. Edward nodded. And no one touched him before the assistant director. Not according to footage. He looked up. According to footage or according to what the footage clearly shows? Ashcroft almost smiled. "You'll enjoy this one." "No," Edward said, "I won't." He stood. "What was the family doing when he collapsed?" Ashcroft looked at her notes. Richard was in scripted dialogue, Evelyn seated, Lauren holding a mug, Noah standing left of frame, Miriam seated by the window chair, standard family breakfast block. "Not standard anything," Edward said quietly. He looked at the marks again. 5 family members, 1 director, full crew nearby, cameras rolling. And still, Graham Lockwood had died in a way no one could explain cleanly. That meant one of 2 things. Either the death had entered the room before anyone knew it mattered, or everyone in the room had noticed the wrong event first. He turned toward the kitchen island. On the polished surface sat a collection of domestic props that had already been sealed and labeled. 1 fruit bowl, 1 sponsor brand cereal box, 2 untouched plates of arranged berries, 1 carafe of orange juice, 3 mugs, 1 knife used to slice grapefruit for an earlier take, 1 linen napkin, and a ceramic sugar bowl with a lid. Edward looked at the sugar bowl, then at the mugs, then at the family marks. Which of these belonged to whom? Ashcroft pointed. Richard's cup, Evelyn's, Lauren's. Noah had nothing in hand until take 2. Miriam had tea in the seated setup, but not in this shot. And Graham? He had his own coffee, paper cup from production. Edward nodded. Who placed the props? Food stylist and prop master, both interviewed. And? They swear the arrangement was reset exactly as scheduled after the previous take. Edward looked at her. They always swear that. She did smile then, briefly. He stepped toward the monitor station. Graham's headset lay in another evidence tray. Beside it sat the production switchboard, still active but locked, and a stock of handwritten shot notes clipped together with black tape. Edward picked up the top sheet with gloved fingers. Scene 26. Family breakfast, camera 2. Richard opening line. Camera 4, Evelyn hand on island. Camera 1, wide after Noah line. Insert option, Miriam reaction if needed. He stopped. That's interesting. Ashcroft moved closer. What? He pointed. If needed. Yes? Meaning Graham expected Miriam to react. Ashcroft thought about that. Or he wanted coverage. Edward nodded. Yes, but coverage for what? He set the sheet down. Miriam. The old woman had looked at him just before he collapsed. The production script had anticipated that she might matter visually, even if the network didn't understand why. Interesting. He crossed to the false window wall. From the audience side, it looked like a morning city view beyond tasteful domestic glass. Up close, it was printed, backlit acrylic over a metal frame. Beside Miriam's chair sat a small side table, a closed book, a tea saucer, and a folded throw blanket no one had used. Edward looked back toward the family marks. From here, Miriam had a clean diagonal sightline to Graham, Richard, Lauren's mug, and part of the island's surface nearest Evelyn. Not Noah's hands, not the full prop table, not the service corridor. She saw selected things. That mattered. Who said she noticed something, he asked. Ashcroft checked her notes. No one. Edward turned. She looked at Graham before he went down. Ashcroft raised an eyebrow. You've already watched the footage? No, Edward said, but old women like that don't turn their heads unless the room has made a mistake. That earned silence, which in Ashcroft's case usually meant provisional agreement.
He moved toward the pantry arch. From the camera side, it looked like open shelving and decorative jars. Behind it ran a narrow shadow corridor wide enough for 2 crew members to pass sideways if they disliked each other. Cables, sandbags, a light stand, a coiled power sneak, an emergency extinguisher, the hidden skeleton of the perfect kitchen. Edward stepped into the corridor and looked back through the archway. Now he saw the set correctly, not as a room, as a machine. 5 visible family members in the lit center, crew on the edges, objects placed for hands, cameras forcing attention into lanes, and Graham positioned just off center where he could see everything but still be seen by anyone choosing not to perform. Who had access to this corridor during the take? Ashcroft answered immediately. Crew only. That's not a useful category. No, she agreed. It never is. She handed him another sheet. Assistant director, camera operators, sound, script supervisor, prop assistant, 2 lighting techs, family wrangler, makeup on standby outside the line, executive producer in the control room behind glass, network representative present for first half of day, left before lunch, director free to move. Edward scanned it once and gave it back. Any missing time? Too much noise to call it missing yet. Good answer. He walked farther down the hidden corridor until he reached the service door behind the breakfast nook wall. This opened onto a staging area with prop shelves, duplicate mugs, backup food trays, cleaning supplies, and a rolling rock of sponsor-branded products waiting for their close-ups. Edward stopped in front of the backup mugs, 4 identical ceramic mugs, 1 missing from the line. Lauren's. He looked at the rack label. Breakfast Hero Set, Mug B, daughter. Interesting, not because branded television used duplicate objects, of course it did, but duplicate objects meant substitution, and substitution meant the room could have been altered in ways that looked accidental on camera and banal off camera. He turned back. How many resets before the collapse? 3 full, 1 partial. Same mugs each time? According to props, yes. According to logs. Ashcroft looked at him. You really do start with cups. I start with repeated lies, Edward said. Cups are often merely their delivery system. They returned to the kitchen floor. Edward stood where Graham had stood again and tried the room one more time. Richard speaking, Evelyn posed, Lauren holding the mug, Noah sarcastic, Miriam seated, Graham watching the monitors, then something wrong enough that Miriam looked at him before anyone else stopped performing. Not the fall, before the fall. That was the key. He looked at the island surface. Which family member first moved after he collapsed? Ashcroft checked. Noah, emotionally or physically? Physically, good. And Richard reached the body first, as fathers on camera usually do, Edward murmured. Ashcroft heard him anyway. You think he was performing even then? I think men like Richard Vale do not wait for grief to become visible before using it. He stepped closer to Lauren's position mark. There, on the floor beside the island, almost hidden beneath the overhang, a tiny crescent-shaped flake of white ceramic had been tagged, but not yet bagged. Edward crouched. From the mug? Probably, Ashcroft said. Probably is lazy. You looked up. Fine, yes, it matches the finish. Edward nodded. Did the mug crack when he fell? No impact line suggests that, so it was already damaged. Possibly. No, Edward said. Probably. This time, Ashcroft did laugh, a short one. He stood again and looked toward the control room glass above the floor. Through the dark panel, he could see the editing suite beyond, monitors, black chairs, 2 producers, a legal advisor, all pretending not to watch him. Graham Lockwood had collected leverage in secret. The family had each been trying to injure one another privately. The network was packaging all of it publicly, and now a man is dead on the studio floor while everyone nearby had both motive and staging experience. He turned back to Ashcroft. Where are the interviews?
Richard in dressing room 1, Evelyn in 2, Lauren in the green room, Noah in wardrobe because he refused the family lounge and said it smelled like fake fruit, Miriam in the old audience holding room. Edward nodded slowly. And who asked for a lawyer first? Richard. Who asked for one second? Evelyn. Who didn't ask? Ashcroft checked nothing this time. She already knew. Lauren, Noah, Miriam. Good. He looked once more around the set. The ideal kitchen, the cups, the hidden corridor, the monitor notes, the old woman's sightline, the chipped mug, the duplicate prop rock. Then he said, take me to Miriam first. Ashcroft raised an eyebrow. Not Richard? No. Why? Edward looked back at the frozen image of the smiling father on camera too. He said, because Richard will tell me what the episode needs to be. Miriam may tell me where the scene stopped obeying direction. He started toward the exit, then stopped. One more thing. Ashcroft waited. Lock down the prop room completely. No resets, no substitutions, and nobody touches Lauren's mug again. You think it matters? Edward looked at the island. Yes, he said. Either it killed Graham or it was supposed to ruin someone else first. That landed exactly where it needed to. Good, because now the room had finally stopped looking like a television set. Now it looked like what it had probably been from the start. A domestic fiction built on cue marks, replacement objects, hidden roots, and the assumption that no one would ever examine the family closely enough to see where the performance ended. Edward intended to begin there. Chapter 2. Miriam Vale. Miriam Vale did not look like a woman who frightened easily. She looked like a woman who once frightened everyone around her so thoroughly that now she no longer needed to. The old audience holding room sat behind Studio B, beyond a corridor of cable trunks, folding partitions, and motivational posters aimed at daytime contestants who needed help pretending they were excited to lose on camera. The room itself had once held studio guests waiting for applause cues and last-minute makeup. Now it held one old woman, one upholstered chair, one untouched cup of tea, and a silence far cleaner than anything in the family lounge. Miriam sat beside a small table under a wall lamp that made everyone else look tired and made her look carved. She wore the same navy suit as during the shoot. Her cane leaned against the chair but remained unnecessary. Her face had the kind of age money could preserve but not soften. Clear bone, sharp eyes, deep lines arranged by contempt rather than sorrow. Of everyone in the Vale family, she alone seemed entirely uninterested in whether she was still attractive to the camera. That made her the least manageable person in the building. When Edward entered, she looked at him once and said, "You're not police." "No." "Good. Police always arrive after the interesting part." Edward took the chair opposite her. Inspector Ashcroft remained by the door. No book closed this time. That was wise. Miriam did not need the encouragement of visible bureaucracy. She would speak if she chose. Or not. Edward began simply. "You looked at Graham before he fell." Miriam gave a smallest hint of approval. "So you do watch people before asking them questions?" "I try." "Yes," she said. "You look like you would." Silence. Then, "Yes," Miriam said. "I looked at him before he fell." "Why?" "Because he had finally understood he was in danger." Edward did not move. "What made you think that?" Miriam folded her hands loosely over the head of her cane. His face changed. "That happens before people die." "No, that happens before people stop pretending." Good, Edward thought. Not sentimental, structural. What did he see? "I don't know." "You have an opinion." "Several." "Give me the useful one." That earned him the faintest shadow of a smile. Miriam looked toward the studio wall as if she could still see through it into the kitchen set beyond. 3 things happened almost at once. One of them mattered, the other 2 were noise. Edward waited. The boy made one of his ugly little remarks. The daughter held the wrong mug and Evelyn moved her hand. Ashcroft looked up immediately. Edward didn't. "Wrong mug?" "Yes." "How do you know it was wrong?" Miriam's eyes moved back to him, faintly irritated, because the prop girl had changed it earlier. There it was. "Tell me." Miriam sighed softly, not from fatigue, but from the burden of being surrounded by slower people. An hour before the scene, during one of the resets, Lauren dropped her mug in the side prep area. It didn't shatter, it chipped. The prop girl panicked because she assumed continuity would matter more than common sense. She replaced it with another mug from the backup rack. Edward nodded once. "And you saw that?" "Yes." "Did anyone else?" "The girl who dropped it, the prop girl. Possibly one of the camera assistants. Certainly not Richard. He doesn't see objects unless they bear his reflection." Ashcroft's pen was moving again. "Did Graham know the mug had been changed?" Edward asked. Miriam considered. "Probably not at first." "At first?" She looked at him. When he looked up during the take, he wasn't looking at Lauren, not exactly. He was looking at the arrangement, the scene. Something in the scene had gone off script. Edward leaned back slightly. "And the wrong mug was part of that?" "Yes." "What was the other part?" Miriam said nothing for a moment. Then, Evelyn's hand moved. Edward kept his voice calm. "Where?" "Across the island, not far, barely enough to matter if you weren't watching for intention." "And you were." "I am old," Miriam said. "People assume old women are decorative. That allows one to observe." Edward let the line sit. "Did she touch the mug?" "No."
Are you sure? Yes. Then what did she touch? Miriam looked mildly disappointed in him now. The sugar bowl. That changed the room. Ashcroft's notebook stopped moving entirely for half a second. Edward said, before Graham collapsed. Yes. During the take? Yes. How? She lifted the lid, then put it back. Why would she do that? Miriam's eyes sharpened. You tell me. I've spent 30 years watching that woman touch objects only when she intends to control the people around them. Edward held her gaze. Did Graham see it? I think so. Think or no? Miriam tilted her head slightly. He looked from the monitor to the island, then to Evelyn, then toward Lauren's mug. Then he tried to step in. Edward said nothing. That was a sequence, a very useful one. So Graham did not collapse randomly. No. He reacted to something he had just understood. Yes. Ashcroft spoke at last. Why didn't you tell us this first? Miriam turned her head toward her, slow and exact. Because your officers asked whether I saw him fall, she said. They did not ask whether I saw the scene decide to become something else. Ashcroft accepted that without argument. Good. Edward changed directions. You don't like your family. Miriam gave her a dry look. That is a childish sentence. Try an adult one. She adjusted one cuff. My family, she said, is a well-capitalized hostage situation with matching dinnerware. Ashcroft looked down at the floor. Edward ignored the line's quality and stayed with its content. Who hated Graham Lockwood most? Miriam answered immediately. All of them. Useful. No. Accurate. Edward nodded. Who feared him most? Now she took longer. Richard feared exposure. Evelyn feared loss of control. Lauren feared permanent capture. Noah feared becoming content. I feared poor editing. That almost earned a smile. Almost. Richard first, Edward said. Why exposure? Miriam looked toward the wall again. Because Graham had started collecting material he should not have been allowed to keep. Richard understood that. Men like my son always know when another man is accumulating leverage. And Evelyn? She understood sooner. Because? Because women like Evelyn measure danger by who is still listening after the room stops being polite. Edward nodded slowly. And Lauren? Miriam's voice lost some of its contempt there, not warmth, something smaller. Lauren is still young enough to believe that private humiliation can become permanent if the internet touches it, which is unfortunately one of the few things young people understand better than adults. And Noah?
Miriam almost shrugged. Noah wants the whole structure to burn. That is not the same thing as wanting one corpse. Edward let that pass, for now. What about you? Miriam looked at him directly. I wanted Graham to stop filming my family before the network could turn our private rot into educational content. Did you want him dead? No. Did you want him frightened? A pause. Yes. Honest. Good. Edward returned to the point that mattered. You saw Evelyn touch the sugar bowl, he said. Yes. Was that normal blocking? No. How do you know? Because in the previous take, she never touched it, and because Evelyn doesn't improvise domestic gestures, she curates them. Did Lauren react? Miriam thought. No, but that means nothing. Lauren has spent years pretending not to notice her mother's hands. Interesting. And Richard? He didn't see it. You're certain? Yes. Why? Because Richard was in love with his own close-up. Edward accepted that. And Noah? Miriam's expression shifted by a millimeter. He saw something. What? I don't know. You have a better answer than that. Yes. She looked at him steadily. He saw enough to become genuinely alarmed instead of theatrically rude. That mattered. When? Half a second before Graham went down. Because of the sugar bowl? Perhaps, or because of Lauren's cup. Edward stood. Miriam looked up at him. You know more than you're saying, he said. So do you. Yes. Then let's save time, she said.
You think Graham realized something had been altered in this scene. You think Evelyn touched it. You think the daughter was holding the wrong object. And you think the family has spent so long sabotaging each other that the murder entered disguised as one more small act of spite. Edward watched her for a moment. Yes, he said. Miriam nodded once. Good, because that's the first intelligent thing this production has managed all month. He moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. Why did you look at Graham before he fell? Miriam answered without delay this time. Because he looked at me. Edward turned back. Why would he do that? The old woman's face became very still. Because he knew that if anyone in that room understood the family had just stopped performing, it would be me. That was enough. When he and Ashcroft stepped back into the corridor, she said, Well. Edward kept walking. Get me the prop assistant. The one who replaced Lauren's mug. Yes. And the sugar bowl. Yes. Ashcroft kept pace. You think Evelyn put something in it? I think she touched it during a take where she wasn't supposed to. That's not the same thing. No, Edward said, but it's how posing usually introduces itself to polite rooms. Ashcroft was silent for a moment. And Miriam? Edward glanced back once toward the holding room door. Miriam doesn't care enough to be believed to waste time lying elegantly, he said. That makes her more useful than the rest. He stopped at the intersection where one corridor led back to the stage and another towards props and prep. The mug first, then the prop girl, then Evelyn. Ashcroft raised an eyebrow. Not Richard? No. Why? Edward looked toward Studio B, where the perfect kitchen still glowed beneath all that managed light. Because Richard will lie in full sentences, he said. Evelyn will lie with her hands.
Chapter 3. The Prop Girl. Tessa Blum looked like someone who apologized before opening doors in her own apartment. Edward Hale had expected that too. Production assistants and prop girls occupied a specific rung in the food chain of television, close enough to disaster to be blamed for it, low enough in power to know that everyone above them considered panic a professional weakness. They saw everything, they remembered too much, and they spent most of their working lives deciding which version of the truth was least likely to cost them rent. Tessa sat in the prop prep room on a folding chair beside a stainless work table covered in labeled containers, duplicate utensils, sponsor-approved cereal boxes, and the exhausted remains of fake domesticity. She was in her 20s, small, pale, and trying very hard not to cry because she had already decided that crying in front of police would make her look guilty. Her headset sat coiled beside her like something dead. Her badge still hung around her neck. No one had thought to take it off, which Edward found insulting on her behalf. Inspector Ashcroft stood near the shelving unit with a clipboard and 3 evidence bags laid out on the table. The chipped mug, the replacement mug, the sugar bowl. Good. Edward took the chair opposite Tessa and kept his voice low. You replaced Lauren's mug. Tessa swallowed. Yes. Walk me through it. She nodded too quickly. It happened after take 2. Lauren had the blue mark mug, mug B, the daughter mug. She set it down too close to the prep counter edge, then someone bumped the cart and it tipped. Who bumped the cart? Tessa looked frightened by the specificity. I don't know if it was really a bump. It might have been me or Noah. He came through the prep lane too fast. Edward said nothing. Tessa rushed to fill the silence. It didn't smash, she said, just chipped, near the rim, small but visible, so I swapped it with the backup. Ashcroft asked, did anyone tell you to do that? Tessa shook her head. No, it's standard continuity. If hero props get damaged, we replace them. Edward pointed to the evidence bag with the chipped mug. Did you wash it? No. Did you leave it here? Yes. Who knew? Tessa hesitated. Me, Jules from continuity, maybe Darren, the second camera assistant. He laughed because he said if Lauren Vale got killed by a ceramic mug, at least the network could sell the clip. Edward let that pass for later. Did Graham know? Tessa took longer. I don't think so. Not right away. Later? I'm not sure. Edward leaned back slightly. Don't be careful. Be accurate. Tessa looked at him, then at the sugar bowl, then back down. Later, I think maybe he noticed something off on the monitor. Why? Because he looked toward the prep counter before the last take, like he was checking continuity, but he didn't ask me anything. Good. Edward's gaze moved to the chipped mug. The break was clean and shallow, a crescent near the rim, exactly as Ashcroft had described. Not enough to harm someone, enough to matter if the room cared about identity. Who handled the replacement mug after you set it? Tessa frowned. I put it on the tray, then took it to set. Who touched it on set?
Lauren picked it up. Before Lauren, Tessa hesitated again. I don't know. Maybe no one. Edward didn't blink. That's not true. She flinched. I mean, I set it down on the island during reset, then Hare came in for a shine check, then Evelyn crossed behind me, then Richard asked for different serial placement, then Graham called for speed because the sponsor rep was still in the building. Edward raised his hand. Stop. The room obeyed. He let her breathing settle. Evelyn crossed behind you. Yes. Did she touch the mug? Her eyes widened slightly. I didn't see. You're not sure. Now, would it have been possible? Yes. That was enough. Ashcroft stepped in. What about the sugar bowl? Tessa looked almost relieved to move to a different object. It was part of the breakfast cluster all morning. Same bowl every take. Who reset it? Usually me. Usually? Tessa nodded. Sometimes Evelyn would move things herself. Edward said, during takes? Not really, mostly before. She'd say things like the table felt wrong, or the family wouldn't keep sugar that close to the fruit, or the spoon angle looked cheap. Ashcroft looked up. She touched props often. Yes. Did Graham allow that? Tessa gave a tiny nervous laugh.
He hated it. Why? Because he said families like theirs always try to direct from inside the shot. Edward nodded. Yes. And today, Tessa's fingers tightened around the edge of the folding chair. Today, Evelyn touched the bowl right before the final take. The room changed. Ashcroft did not move, but the stillness sharpened. Edward kept his voice level. Describe it. Tessa swallowed. I had already placed everything. The bowl was set, lid on, spoon to the right, standard breakfast position. Then Evelyn came in while sound was tricking Richard. She lifted the lid, looked inside, and put it back. Looked inside? Yes. Only looked. Tessa nodded too quickly again. Edward didn't help her. After 2 seconds, she said, I think. You think? She had one hand around the lid and the other... Tessa stopped. The other what? The girl looked miserable now. The other hand was close to the bowl, she said. I was carrying plates. I wasn't staring, but you noticed enough to remember. Yes. Edward pointed to the evidence bag. Did she use the spoon? I don't know. Did anyone else touch the bowl after her? Tessa closed her eyes briefly. Graham, that landed. Ashcroft said when? Right before rolling, he stepped in, moved half the fruit bowl an inch, looked at Lauren's mug, then he took the sugar bowl lid off for a second. Edward stayed very still. And? Tessa's voice got quieter. He looked annoyed. Why? I don't know. You do. I don't know what he saw. Edward let that stand for a moment. Then, did he say anything? Tessa nodded. Yes. What? He said, who touched this? That was better than useful. That was sequence. Ashcroft wrote it down immediately. Edward asked, who answered? No one. Then what happened? Tessa looked at the floor. He looked toward Evelyn, then toward Lauren's mug. Then he said, places, now. Edward nodded slowly. And then the take began? Yes. And during the take, Evelyn touched the sugar bowl again? Tessa looked up sharply. I didn't see that. Miriam did. The girl's face changed again. Not because she doubted Miriam, because she had realized the older woman had seen more than the crew. Oh, Tessa said quietly. Yes, Edward said. He stood. Tessa looked alarmed, as though standing meant accusation was about to become formal. It's all right. You're not the center of this. You're just where the set stopped behaving. That almost made her cry anyway. Ashcroft said, one last question, Tessa. Did anyone ask you later what happened with the mugs? The girl hesitated. Yes. Who? Lauren. Edward looked back. When? After Graham collapsed while people were shouting. She grabbed my arm and asked, which mug did you give me? Silence. Edward said, exactly like that? Tessa nodded. Yes. Not, what happened? Not, is he dead? Not, what did he drink? Tessa shook her head. No. Edward filed that carefully. Lauren had not reacted first like a daughter, influencer, or witness. She had reacted like a participant in continuity. Interesting. He looked once more at the table. Mug, bowl, lid, spoon, a reset, a touch, a second touch. Graham noticing. Graham saying, who touched this? Then taking one step, then dying. Too narrow now to be random. He turned to Ashcroft. Have forensics prioritize the bowl, spoon, lid, and both mugs for contact transfer. They already are. Good. And isolate Lauren. Ashcroft raised an eyebrow. Not Evelyn? Evelyn will lie elegantly. Lauren will lie quickly. He glanced at Tessa, and one of them already knew the object mattered before anyone told them it should. Ashcroft nodded once. When they stepped back into the corridor, she said, you think the bowl was altered for Lauren? Yes. And Graham noticed before she used it? Yes. And then? Edward looked toward the studio doors. And then someone had a problem. Ashcroft was silent for a second. You think Graham was the intended victim or collateral? I think, Edward said, that this set was already poisoned socially before anyone bothered to do it chemically. She almost smiled. That sounds like one of yours. No, he said, it sounds like television. He started walking. Richard? She asked. Edward shook his head. Lauren.
Because of the mug question. Yes. And then? He looked back once toward the prop room. Then, Evelyn. Chapter 4. Lauren Vale. Lauren Vale had already decided which version of herself would survive the day. Edward Hale could see that before she spoke. The network's green room had been converted into a holding area with the kind of hurried respect institutions reserved for attractive people who might later become legal liabilities. Someone had brought bottled water no one drank, a blanket no one used, and a plate of cut fruit that had begun to collapse into itself under studio air conditioning. Makeup lights still framed one mirror. 2 production interns sat outside the door pretending not to listen. Inside, Lauren sat on the far end of a sofa with her hands folded too neatly in her lap, as though posture alone might keep the room from touching her. She had changed out of wardrobe. Good. Costume always lied too loudly. Now she wore black jeans, a cream sweater, no jewelry except one thin ring, and the face of a woman young enough to still be underestimated and old enough to know how useful that could be. Her hair was tied back. Her mascara had held, which meant either she had not cried or she had cried carefully. Edward had long ago given moral credit to either. Inspector Ashcroft remained near the kitchenette counter with her notebook open. Lauren looked first at Edward, then at Ashcroft, then back. "Am I under arrest?" "No," Edward said. "Am I a suspect?" "Yes." That surprised her. Good. Most people expected comfort before accuracy. It made them sloppier when denied. Lauren crossed one leg over the other. For what? That depends on which part of the day we're discussing. Her gaze sharpened by a fraction. So, not stupid. Also good. Edward sat opposite her. "Let's start with the mug," he said. Lauren didn't move. "What about it?" "You asked the prop assistant which mug she gave you." Silence. "Then, did she tell you that?" "Yes." Lauren exhaled slowly through her nose.
I was confused. No. This time she blinked. "Excuse me?" "You weren't confused," Edward said. "You were checking continuity. That is not the same thing." Ashcroft did not look up. She didn't need to. Lauren's voice cooled. "Maybe I just remembered dropping the first one. Did you?" "A beat." "Yes." "Who saw you drop it?" "I don't know. Crew." "Did your mother?" The smallest pause. "I don't think so." Edward nodded. "Wrong." Now she was irritated. "You don't get to say wrong every time I answer." "Yes," he said. "I do." Ashcroft looked down harder at her notes, which meant she had nearly smiled. Edward continued. "Your mother crossed behind the prep station during reset. She had access to the replacement muck. She touched the sugar bowl before the take. Graham noticed. Then he looked at you. Then he died." Lauren stared at him. The performance shifted. "Good. Are you saying my mother poisoned a prop?" "I'm saying this family has been trying to injure itself in installments through weeks. A prop is merely the first honest object in the room." Lauren looked away for the first time, toward the mirror, toward her own reflection, though Edward doubted she was really seeing it. "What did Graham know?" she asked. There it was. Not did he suffer, not was it fast, not who killed him. What did he know? Edward kept his face neutral. "Enough to alarm you." She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You have no idea what alarms me." "No," Edward said. "That's why we're here." He let the silence lengthen. Lauren broke first. "He had footage," she said. Ashcroft looked up immediately. Edward stayed still. "What kind of footage?" Lauren closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Everything," she said. "Conversations, fights, mic checks he never logged, waiting room audio. He had a private folder." "Did you see it?" "Yes." "When?" 2 nights ago." "How?" "I wasn't supposed to," she paused. "I was looking for something else." "What?" "My own recordings." Edward nodded slowly. "Yes, your private recordings." Lauren met his gaze. "You already know about those." "Yes." "Then don't act impressed." "I'm not," Edward said. "I'm trying to decide whether you are protecting yourself or building leverage." She almost smiled. "Same thing in my family." That was probably true. "Who were you sending them to?" Edward asked. "A journalist." "Name?" She gave it. Ashcroft wrote it down. "Why?" Edward asked. Lauren looked tired now and not interested him more than fear would have. "Because nobody believes you when you grow up inside a family brand," she said. "They think if you're miserable in a house like ours, you're doing luxury wrong." Edward said nothing. She continued. "My father cheats. My mother negotiates everyone's life like it's airtime. My brother thinks destruction counts as honesty. My grandmother treats affection like a clerical error, and the network loves all of it as long as the light is warm enough." That wasn't a confession. That was inventory.
Useful. And Graham? Lauren's face changed again. He knew the season would explode if he cut the real version, she said. He liked that. Did he threaten you? Not directly. That means yes. She looked annoyed again. He said some people survive truth better than others. When? Yesterday. About what? He'd seen one of the files I sent out.
Ashcroft said, so he was blackmailing you. Lauren shook her head. No, Graham wasn't that clean. He didn't want money. He wanted control of the release. Edward almost smiled. That sounded right. Did your mother know? About the files? Yes. She suspected. And the mug? Now Lauren looked down at her hands. For the first time, the performance thinned enough for something real to move underneath it. My mother told me to use it, Lauren said quietly. Ashcroft said, the mug? Lauren nodded. Yes. Explain. Lauren took a breath. During it, Edward watched her hands. No shaking, just tension in the fingers. This was not a girl remembering trauma. This was a woman deciding whether to stop protecting someone. My mother came up to me before the take, Lauren said. She said not to switch anything around, not to improvise, not to take Noah's water if he left it near my mark, and to keep using the mug that had been set for me. Edward's voice stayed level. Why would she say that? Because she said continuity matters. No, why would she really say that? Lauren looked at him. Because she wanted to make sure I drank from the right cup. Silence. Ashcroft's pen stopped moving altogether. Edward did not help her. Lauren continued. I didn't drink from it, she said. Why not? Because the rim felt wrong. The chip. Yes. You knew it had been replaced. Yes. And not bothered you. Lauren laughed once bitterly. Everything in that house of a set bothered me. Not enough. She stared at him, then nodded once. Fair. What did you do? I held it. I said my line. I wasn't going to drink until the close-up. Was there a close-up scheduled? Yes, after Richard's second line and the sponsor insert. Edward thought about that. So the mug had not yet been used, not by Lauren, and not in the planned sequence, which means if poison had been placed in relation to the mug or sugar bowl, the intended target may not have reached the trigger before Graham intervened. Good. Did you sweeten anything? He asked. No. Did you touch the sugar bowl? No. Did you see your mother do it? A pause. Yes, there it was. Before the take. Yes. What did she do? She lifted it, then put it back differently. Ashcroft said, differently how? Lauren frowned, reconstructing. Handle turned outward, she said. Before that, it was angled left. Edward nodded slowly. Small, petty, precise. The kind of manipulation people called nothing until someone was dead. And Graham saw. Yes. How do you know? Because he looked at the bowl, then at me, then at her. And then he said, who touched this? Yes. The room was reducing now. Very good. Ashcroft asked, why didn't you tell the police that first? Lauren looked at her as if the answer should have been obvious. Because if I tell police my mother altered a prop bowl seconds before a director dies, my family's lawyers stop calling me a daughter and start calling me unstable. Not wrong. Edward changed direction. You weren't the only one trying to frame someone. Lauren's eyes sharpened. No. Who are you trying to frame? She laughed again, but softer this time. No one? No. All right, she said. Not frame, record. For what purpose? So if my mother tried to bury me, I could bury her back. That was cleaner. With what? Lauren looked at the makeup mirror, where her own face waited in lit squares. My phone, she said. Audio, mostly. Where is it? Police took it. Ashcroft nodded once. Yes. Edward filed that. And Noah. What about him? He was sabotaging equipment. Lauren's mouth moved once in irritation. He calls it sabotage. Half the time it was just him being a bored little arsonist with no fire. And the other half? She thought. He wanted shoots delayed. He wanted sponsors angry. He wanted my father furious. He wanted my mother tired enough to lose control. Useful. And Richard. Lauren's expression hardened. My father thinks consequences are things that happen to women, staff, and publicists. Good, but still not enough. Edward leaned forward for the first time. When Graham looked at your mug, what did you think he knew? That hit. Lauren went very still. Then, I thought my mother had set me up. No more performance left after that. The sentence sat between them exactly as it needed to. Ashcroft said quietly, set you up for what? Lauren's voice was smaller now, though not weaker. For a scene, she said.
for a breakdown, for some kind of on-camera spiral. My mother doesn't always think in death. She thinks in usable damage. Edward nodded. Yes, that felt right. Did you think the bull was drugged? Lauren looked at him. I thought the coffee might be. Edward didn't move. There was no coffee in the mug. No, Lauren said, but there was supposed to be later. There it was, the sequence again. Not immediate murder, staged deterioration. A daughter destabilized on camera. A family brand kept intact by making one member look unwell, unstable, ungrateful, or impossible. Very elegant, very maternal, very poisonous. And then Graham saw the move, and something changed. Why did Graham die now if you were the one being lined up? Lauren went exhausted suddenly, truly exhausted. Because he touched the bowl, she said. Silence. Ashcroft said, You didn't mention that. Lauren gave her a tired look. You didn't ask me in the right order. Edward stayed with it. Tell me. He stepped in before rolling. He lifted the lid. He looked inside. Then he used the spoon. That changed everything. Ashcroft spoke first. He sweetened his coffee. Lauren nodded once. Yes. Edward saw the scene immediately. Wrong mug, touched bowl, reset spoon. Graham notices, lifts lid, touches spoon, returns to position, takes a sip from his own paper cup, then dies. Not the intended victim. The most dangerous kind of death in rooms like this, a correction collision. Did Evelyn know he took sugar? Edward asked. Lauren said nothing. That was answer enough. He stood. Lauren looked up at him. I didn't kill him, she said. I know. That surprised her. Then she said, but I was glad for half a second when he fell. Edward nodded once. Yes, he said. That sounds like the room. He moved toward the door. Ashcroft stayed 1 second longer. Last question, she said. When you asked Tessa which mug you had, what were you really checking? Lauren's eyes shifted to her hands. Whether my mother had picked the right target, she said. No one spoke after that. When they stepped into the corridor, Ashcroft closed the door behind them. Well, Edward looked toward Studio B. Get me Evelyn now. Ashcroft fell into step beside him. You think she drugged the sugar? Yes. To destabilize Lauren on camera? Yes. And Graham sweetened his coffee by accident? Yes. Ashcroft was quiet for a moment. That still leaves motive for murder unresolved. Edward shook his head. No, he said. It leaves something worse. What? He looked back once toward the green room door. It means the family was already trying to poison the episode before anyone bothered to poison the man. Chapter 5. Evelyn Vale. Evelyn Vale received Edward Hale in the makeup room she had unofficially taken over by noon. That told him almost everything he needed before she spoke. People under pressure instinctively retreated to places that reflected how they understood power. Richard had gone to a dressing room with a lock and a mirror framed for close-ups. Lauren had chosen the green room, where vulnerability could still pretend to be temporary. Noah had occupied wardrobe because chaos suited him and order offended him. Miriam had taken the old holding room and made it hers through stillness alone. Evelyn chose makeup, controlled light, controlled surfaces, controlled face, a room built around correction. When Edward entered, she sat before the illuminated mirror with both hands folded on the counter, looking not shaken, not grieving, not even defensive. She looked curated. Her hair had been retouched. Her lipstick was gone, but neatly gone. The tissues beside her had been used once and folded. If she had cried, she had done so with restraint appropriate to a woman who understood that smeared mascara was for people without contracts. Inspector Ashcroft remained by the door. Evelyn watched Edward in the mirror first, then turned in her chair. Mr. Hale, I assume this is the part where my motherhood becomes a police theory. Edward took the chair opposite her. No, this is the part where your hands do. That landed. Good. She smiled faintly. You have a taste for drama. No, Edward said, only sequence. Silence. Then Evelyn said, "Ask." So he did. "You touched the sugar bowl before the take." "Yes."
Twice. She tilted her head slightly. According to whom? According to the room. That almost amused her. "I adjusted it," she said. "How?" "I lifted the lid." "And the spoon?" A pause. "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him directly now. "Because props are almost always wrong." "That's not a reason," Edward said. "That's a reflex." Evelyn's expression did not shift much, but the air around it did. "Fine," she said, "because the scene looked artificial." It was artificial. That doesn't mean it should look careless. Edward let that pass. "You moved the spoon." "Yes." "Into what position?" "Handle out." "Why?" Again that almost smile. "You really do enjoy asking small questions like they're loaded firearms. They usually are." Ashcroft wrote nothing for several seconds. Good. The silence would be harder on Evelyn than visible note-taking. Evelyn crossed one leg over the other. "I moved the spoon because Lauren is left-handed, or was for years before she decided being inconvenient counted as personality." Edward said nothing. That answer was elegant. Too elegant. "Lauren says you told her to keep using the mug that had been set for her." "Yes." "Why?" "Continuity." "No." Evelyn exhaled slowly. "You people do love that word. Only when it fails." A faint tightening at the corner of her mouth. There, real irritation. "Lauren drops things when she's anxious. If she began switching props, fidgeting, improvising, the scene would unravel and Graham would blame all of us for losing time." "Graham already thought your family was poison." "That hardly narrows the room." "Fair." Edward leaned back. "You altered the sugar bowl because you expected Lauren to use it later." Evelyn was silent. "That's not a question," he added. "No," she said quietly, "it isn't." Ashcroft lifted her head. "So you admit it?" Evelyn turned toward her. "I admit I adjusted a prop in a room built from adjusted props. Don't rush into satisfaction, Inspector. It makes the jaw heavy." Edward intervened before Ashcroft could enjoy the line enough to answer. "What did you put in it?" For the first time, Evelyn did not speak immediately. That mattered more than any verbal answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was still level, but lower. "Nothing lethal." Edward watched her. "What?" Evelyn's gaze moved to the mirror lights. "A stimulant suppressant," she said. "A mild one, dissolvable, unpleasant, not fatal." Ashcroft said, "You drugged your daughter." Evelyn looked back at her. "I intended to calm her." "No," Edward said, "you intended to flatten her." Evelyn's eyes returned to him. "Yes," she said, "if you want the ugly word." He nodded once. "Good." "Why?" "Because she has been leaking us. Not the family, not private matters. Us. Important." "To whom?" Edward asked. "To a journalist, possibly two. Graham knew, or suspected enough." "You knew she was recording?" "Yes." "How?" Evelyn gave him a look that contained a lifetime of contempt for questions she considered beneath her. "Because I raised her." Edward let that stand. Mothers like Evelyn did not believe in discovery. They believed in pattern recognition attached to ownership. "And your plan?" Evelyn's voice became cooler. There was a sponsor segment later in the day. Close-ups, product interaction, a calm domestic beat. If Lauren appeared scattered, over-emotional, unreliable, then two things happened at once. The network would begin to doubt her as a solo asset, and any material she had gathered against us would become easier to frame as instability rather than evidence. Ashcroft said, "That's monstrous." Evelyn looked at her without blinking. "No," she said, "that's television." Edward said quietly, "No, that's family as brand maintenance." Evelyn looked at him. At last, something almost honest surfaced. "Yes," she said. Silence. Then, "Did Richard know?" "No." "Did Noah?" "No." "Miriam?" A pause.
I never assume my mother-in-law knows nothing. Good instinct. The faintest trace of real dislike crossed Evelyn's face. Yes. Edward kept going. And Graham. Evelyn's mouth tightened. He saw the bowl had been disturbed. Yes. He opened it. Yes. He used the spoon. Another pause. Yes. Did you know he sweetened his coffee? No. Edward watched her carefully. This mattered. Not because of the content, because of the speed. Too fast and yet not reflexive, almost as if she had asked herself the same question already and hated the answer. You didn't know, he repeated. No. You didn't expect him to touch the bowl. No. Then why did he look at you? This time the answer came rawer. Because he knew me. That was true enough to matter. How? Evelyn said, he understood control. He collected it. That was his job. He saw rearrangement and always wanted to know who thought they were directing the room. Edward nodded slowly. Yes, that was Graham. Not a man after money, a man after editorial ownership. He said, who touched this? Yes, and you said nothing. What would you have preferred, a confession before the sponsor segment? I would have preferred honesty before a corpse, Ashcroft said. Evelyn did not bother looking at her this time. No, Inspector, she said. You would have preferred a suspect who made your paperwork simpler. That one landed too cleanly. Edward changed angle without warning. You wanted Lauren damaged but usable. Evelyn looked back to him. Yes, not ruined. No, because she is still commercially valuable. Yes, because she is still your daughter. Evelyn did not answer. That was answer enough. He pressed. Which mattered more in that moment? Still no answer. Good. He filed it. Tell me about Richard. Now she did smile, though it had no warmth in it. Must we? Yes. Evelyn uncrossed her legs and leaned back, measuring him differently now. Richard is a man who has confused visibility with virtue for so long that he now believes being watched kindly is the same thing as being good. He thinks the family exists to reflect him at flattering angles. Graham knew that too. That was why he was dangerous. Because he was going to expose Richard. Because he was going to expose all of us, but Richard would have survived best. Men like Richard always do. Edward nodded. And Noah? Evelyn's mouth sharpened. Noah thinks destruction is honesty. That is common in boys who haven't yet paid for either. And Miriam? At that, for the first time, Evelyn looked almost tired. Miriam understands exactly what this family is, she said, which is why she stopped wasting emotion on reform and moved entirely into witness. That was better than most families ever managed to say about their oldest truth-teller. Edward stood. Evelyn looked up at him. You don't think I meant to kill him, she said. No, Edward replied. Then what exactly do you think I did? He looked at the mirror lights, then at her hands resting so carefully in her lap. He said, I think you introduced poison into a room already full of sabotage and assumed you would still control who drank from it.
Dot reached her. Finally. Not fear. Recognition. A slight collapse inward at the eyes. Only for a second. Then gone. Will that satisfy the police? She asked. Ashcroft answered before Edward could. No. Evelyn looked at her. Good, she said. It shouldn't. When Edward and Ashcroft stepped into the corridor, the studio seemed quieter than before, though nothing about it had actually changed. The lights still hummed, crew still whispered. Somewhere, a printer still worked, but the room had crossed the line from suspicion into mechanism. Ashcroft let the door close fully. Well? Edward kept walking. Get Richard ready, he said. You think he knew nothing? No. Ashcroft caught up to him. Then what did he do? Edward looked toward the set. He's the father, he said. Men like Richard never need to poison the cup. They build the table that makes it seem reasonable. Ashcroft was silent for a second. And Noah? Edward glanced toward wardrobe. After Richard. Why not now? Because Noah reacts, Richard plans.
He stopped at the studio doors and looked through the glass at the perfect kitchen still burning under all that artificial mourning. Then he said, "And because before this ends, I want to know which member of the perfect family decided that humiliation wasn't enough anymore." Epilogue: The Brand. Edward Hale gathered them on the set just after midnight. That was deliberate. Inspector Ashcroft had offered him half a dozen better rooms for formal reconstruction: a conference room, a production office, a police interview suite, even the dark control booth above the floor where the whole domestic lie could be watched through one-way glass. Edward refused all of them. The answer belonged in the kitchen. Not because the kitchen was symbolic. He disliked symbolic rooms. Because this one was functional. The island, the mugs, the sugar bowl, the marks on the floor, the lights still calibrated for happiness. This was where the brand had been manufactured, which meant it was also where it had failed. The studio had been cleared except for essential crew, police, and the Vale family. The network lawyers had protested, then accepted when Ashcroft informed them that protest would be entered into the record and interpreted however the Crown later found amusing. Now the 5 members of the perfect family stood or sat where they had spent their lives learning to appear inevitable. Richard Vale stood nearest camera 2 again, though no one had placed him there. That, Edward thought, was almost touching in its predictability. He wore a dark suit now and had regained enough composure to look expensive rather than shattered. His face had arranged itself into the public version of grief, controlled, offended, faintly noble. Evelyn sat on a stool near the island, back straight, hands folded, expression recovered to the point of danger. She had stopped trying to look innocent. That was wise. Innocence would have looked ridiculous on her. Lauren stood beside the breakfast mark where she had held the mug during the take, arms crossed now, all softness burned off, her beauty sharpened by fatigue into something almost severe. Noah leaned against the false pantry wall with the exact insolence of a boy who believed contempt was the only adult emotion not already copyrighted by his parents. Miriam sat once again near the window chair, Kane beside her, watching them all with the still patience of a woman who had long ago accepted that family was simply the most durable form of organized damage. Ashcroft stood off to one side. Edward remained in the center of the floor. The sugar bowl sat in an evidence tray on the island. So did the chipped mug. And beside it, in its own clear bag, Graham Lockwood's paper coffee cup. Edward looked at the family once, then began. Graham Lockwood was not the intended victim. That landed first and clean. Richard reacted before the others. What? Edward ignored him.
By the time he collapsed, he said, this room had already been altered several times by several different people for several different private reasons. That is why this scene looked impossible at first. Too many lies were active at once. Silence. Then Noah said, so that's the family motto now. Miriam didn't look at him. It always was, she said. Edward continued. Your family had spent 3 weeks trying to injure itself in small strategic ways, not murder, brand warfare, reputation management, private leverage, recorded conversations, sabotaged equipment, hidden negotiations, controlled humiliations. He glanced at Richard, and enough vanity to power a medium-sized country. Richard drew himself up. If this is some kind of theatrical accusation, no, it's inventory. Richard stopped. Good. Edward moved to the island. This began with a mug. He lifted the evidence bag containing the chipped ceramic cup. Lauren's original mug was chipped during reset. The prop assistant replaced it with a duplicate. That should have been irrelevant. He set the bag down. It wasn't. Lauren said nothing. Evelyn did. You've already established I touched the bowl. Yes, but I haven't yet established why the replacement mug mattered. He turned toward Lauren. You noticed the wrong mug immediately. Lauren's jaw shifted slightly. Yes. You asked the prop assistant which mug she had given you after Graham died. Richard turned toward his daughter. You what? Lauren didn't look at him. Edward continued. You weren't checking continuity for the episode, he said. You were checking continuity for the trap. Now Evelyn's gaze moved to Lauren. Interesting. Noah laughed once under his breath. Oh, this is getting better. Ashcroft said, quiet. He wasn't. Edward kept going.
Evelyn altered the sugar bowl before the take. She introduced a sedative compound into it, non-lethal but strong enough to flatten affect, slow reaction, and make someone look unstable, tired, emotional, or off-camera unusable. Richard's head turned sharply toward his wife. Evelyn did not look at him. Instead, she said, "That's a melodramatic way of saying mild pharmaceutical intervention." Ashcroft said, "You drugged your daughter." Evelyn's face stayed perfectly still. "I intended to protect the family." Lauren laughed then, a short, ugly sound. "No," she said, "you intended to protect the version of the family that still pays." Richard looked from one to the other as if somebody had changed the script in front of him and forgotten to inform his face. Edward spoke over him. Evelyn expected Lauren to drink later, during the sponsor close-up, not during the wide breakfast opening. That matters. He topped Graham's coffee cup. Graham noticed the sugar bowl had been touched. He lifted the lid, asked who touched this. No one answered. Then, as he often did, he corrected the scene himself. Noah frowned. How corrected? Edward held up the cup. He sweetened his coffee. That shut the room for a second. Then Richard said, "That's absurd." Edward looked at him. "No, it's ordinary. That's why it worked." He set the cup down. Graham used the spoon from the bowl Evelyn had altered for Lauren. Then he stepped back into position. Then the take started. Then he took one sip from his own cup. Then he died. Richard stared at the bowl as if it personally insulted him. Evelyn finally turned toward Richard, not defensive, annoyed. That interested Edward, because it meant the marriage was behaving exactly as expected, not as a partnership, but a board meeting interrupted by a corpse. "You killed him," Richard said. "No, I miscalculated him. There's a difference." Miriam spoke then, very quietly. "There usually isn't." Edward nodded once. Yes. He turned toward Richard. "And you," he said, "did what you always do. You built the room in which everyone else's cruelty could be marketed as an unfortunate disruption of your leadership." Richard looked at him with real anger now. "I did nothing." "No, you did something worse. You believed your family's private war was still manageable as long as the cameras liked you. That hit. Good." Richard's face hardened. "This family has been under pressure for months. Graham Lockwood exploited that pressure. He manipulated all of us." Edward almost smiled. There it was. Finally, a true sentence. Richard blinked. Edward stepped closer. "Graham was manipulating all of you," he said. "He had built a private file, raw arguments, unused audio, mic checks, contradictions. He was preparing an alternate cut of your family." Lauren looked down. Noah didn't. Richard said, "So he was blackmailing us?" "No," Edward said. "Blackmail is cleaner. He wanted control of release, not payment." Evelyn's voice was flat. "He wanted the season to belong to him." "Yes." Richard said, "Then any of us could have wanted him dead." Edward nodded. "Yes, that's what made the room useful." He looked around the set. Richard feared exposure. Evelyn feared losing narrative control. Lauren feared permanent public capture. Noah wanted collapse badly enough to flirt with anything that sped it up. Miriam feared bad editing more than scandal. Miriam inclined her head slightly. "Accurate enough." Noah said, "Can we skip to the part where you tell us which one of us is the psycho?" Edward looked at him. "You." Noah's eyebrows went up. "Excuse me?" "You've sabotaged equipment repeatedly," Edward said. "Small failures, mic dropouts, lighting delays, corrupted card storage. You wanted the set unstable." Noah pushed away from the wall. "That's not murder." "No," Edward agreed. "It's rehearsal." Ashcroft looked up sharply. Edward continued. "You wanted the show to fail. You wanted your father embarrassed. You wanted your mother off balance. You wanted the whole machine to crack because you're 17 and still believe collapse counts as honesty." Noah's face had gone still now. Good. It meant he was listening. "But you didn't kill Graham," Edward said. Noah said nothing. Miriam said quietly, "I told you that." Edward nodded. Yes. He turned back toward the family. The intended target was Lauren. The actual victim was Graham, but the set had already been corrupted by more than one private operation. He looked at Lauren. "You were recording the family and leaking material to a journalist." Lauren didn't answer. "You weren't trying to kill anyone either," Edward said. "You were building an exit route." Still silence. Good. She had finally stopped wasting energy on denial. Edward turned to Richard. "You asked for a lawyer before you asked whether your wife had touched the bowl." Richard stared at him. "What exactly is your point?" "My point," Edward said, "is that this family did not produce one murderer. It produced a room in which private sabotage had become routine enough that a fatal mistake could enter disguised as one more strategic move. That was the center. The room knew it, and now it couldn't unknow it." Evelyn was the one who broke the silence. "So what happens now?" Ashcroft answered before Edward did. "Now," she said, "we discuss charges." Richard turned on her. "You cannot possibly." "Oh, I can possibly," she said. "Administering a pharmaceutical agent without consent in a controlled production environment that resulted in a death, I can possibly all night." Richard looked at Evelyn. "You stupid woman." That was the wrong sentence. Everyone in the room felt it. Not because it was cruel, because it was procedural. The perfect husband, the perfect father, the perfect face of premium domestic order, and that's what came out first. Noah laughed, actually laughed, and this time no one stopped him. "There he is," he said. Lauren closed her eyes. Miriam did not. She looked at Richard with a kind of exhausted vindication. "You see," she said, almost pleasantly, "this is why I stopped wasting religion on bloodlines." Richard looked around the room and realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that none of them were going to help him restore tone. That, Edward thought, was the nearest thing to justice the family would ever recognize emotionally. He stepped back from the island. "One more thing," he said. They all looked at him. Graham Lockwood did not die because one person hated him most. He let the sentence settle. He died because this family had normalized manipulation so thoroughly that no one in the room recognized the exact moment the usual poison became literal. No one spoke, because that was the ugliest truth available, and therefore the correct one. Ashcroft moved first. "Evelyn Vale," she said, "stand up." Evelyn looked at her for a long second, then rose. No tears, no collapse, no plea. Just one last look at the set, at the island, at the bowl, at the lighting, at the room she had helped weaponize against her own daughter and had accidentally surrendered to a dead director instead. Then she said very quietly, "It was supposed to be temporary." Lauren looked at her. "No," she said, "it was supposed to be useful." That landed harder than the handcuffs. Ashcroft led Evelyn away. Richard did not move to follow. Noah didn't look at anyone. Lauren didn't sit. Miriam remained exactly where she was. The perfect family stayed on the set beneath the sign while police escorted its architect of chemical discipline into the corridor behind the kitchen. For one full second after the door closed, nobody moved. The cameras were off, the lights were still perfect, and now, finally, there was nothing left for them to perform. Edward turned to go. At the edge of the set, Miriam spoke one last time. "Mr. Hale." He looked back. She gave the smallest nod toward the glowing sign over the kitchen. "You should tell them to strike that before morning." Edward followed her gaze. The perfect family. Still lit, still warm, still absurd. "Yes," he said, "it's no longer continuity," and left the stage. By sunrise, the network would already be building a replacement narrative. A tragic accident, a prescription mistake, a private family matter complicated by stress, a director's death in an already pressured production environment. They would sand the edges, soften the criminality, protect the sponsors, and save whatever part of the brand was still profitable. They would do what institutions always did when truth arrived with bad optics. But inside the file and in the room and in the memory of everyone forced to stand under those lights after the answer had been spoken aloud, the structure would remain clear. The perfect family had never been a family. It was a production model held together by audience hunger, commercial fear, controlled humiliation, and the daily discipline of not calling emotional violence by its proper name. Graham Lockwood had tried to own the truth of it. Evelyn Vale had tried to control the fallout of it. And in the narrow space between those two ambitions, under studio lights and sponsor money and a fake bowl of lemons, a man had sweetened his coffee from the wrong spoon. That was all. That was enough. They sold the image of a perfect family, the warm light, the polished kitchen.
the safe, beautiful version of home. But behind the cameras, they were already poisoning each other. If you enjoy modern detective stories in the spirit of Sherlock Holmes, subscribe to the channel. The next case is already waiting.